Hi. Hi, welcome back to another live stream of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. The Global Network was created in 1992 to prevent the arms race from moving into space. You can support the show by clicking on the like button and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Also, check out our website at spaceforpeace.org. Our guest this time is Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer. He also served with the United Nations implementing arms control treaties. We thank Global Network board member Will Griffin for doing all the tech work to make this show happen. Scott, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Glad to have you. We're going to discuss the U.S. reluctance to agree to and honor disarmament treaties, something you have real experience with. But before we get into the ABM and the INF treaties, I'd like to share a very brief story. Soon after the 2003 U.S. initiated shock and awe in Iraq, I was watching C-SPAN one evening. The speaker at a big event that was loaded in the audience with Pentagon and CIA brass was then Naval War College professor Thomas Barnett. He spoke about his new book called The Pentagon's New Map. And during his talk, Barnett said the U.S. would not do treaties anymore. In recent years, we've seen the U.S. withdraw from the ABM and the INF treaties. Why is the U.S. moving away from arms control, particularly with Russia and China?
Well, the age of the treaty came in the aftermath of the Second World War, when the United States viewed, especially the Soviet Union, as a peer, as an equal, and we respected their strength. We respected the potential that they had when it came to inflicting harm on us. So treaties were seen as a legitimate means of protecting the national security interests of the United States. They weren't seen, by and large, as, the United States participating in a multilateral effort to make the world a safer place. We'd like them to be that way, but we engaged in the treaty process for purely selfish reasons, as all nations do. What's in it for us is the question. And I think when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, 1992, we lost the respect, the fear of now Russia. And we viewed treaties as being overcomplicated and not rewarding us sufficiently, meaning that we were giving too much away to a weakened enemy. That Russia didn't deserve to be treated as an equal of the United States, that the treaties were no longer balanced reciprocal vehicles. They were very one-sided, with the United States being asked to give up its strategic advantage. And there were many people, and I would dare bet that the gentleman you just spoke of, who viewed the Cold War not as a blessed moment, the end of the Cold War, not as the blessed moment of sanity where humanity can come together and find a new world order, a new way to move forward that avoids replication of what just occurred, but rather as an American victory, similar to that of World War II in scope and scale, where we had overcome a very dangerous enemy. And now that we are victorious, there's no reason for us to give up that which enabled us to be victorious. Our superiority in strategic nuclear weaponry and our potential to produce ballistic missile defense shields and things of this nature. And so I think you saw, for Democrat and Republican alike, Bill Clinton is as guilty as anybody of making the treaty less viable. He failed to pursue aggressively, the the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty process. He allowed it to die a stillborn death, so to speak, through neglect. Then George W. Bush came along, and this individual who spoke was clearly with the Bush administration, and they just viewed treaties as overly complicated. I mean, one of the reasons why treaties were so complicated, for instance, the INF Treaty, which I was involved in, was that you have verification of the treaty. And verification, there's a thin line between verification and espionage, because verification requires you to gain access to information that gives you confidence that the other side is complying with its obligations. And it was also reciprocal. So what you were doing to them, they were doing to you. And there were a lot of rules and regulations involved. And the Bush administration said, we don't want to be involved in any of this. There's no reason for us to be involved in this. And so they walked away from the strategic arms reduction process in totality, and they came up with something called SORT, which is just an overly simplified, almost gentleman's agreement to reduce arms to a certain level with virtually no verification, et cetera. And I think, and I'll finish with this. One of the reasons why, even though the Bush administration is gone and a more, maybe people would say, intellectually curious Obama administration replaced them, we didn't see a dramatic jump back into treaties. Obama was pushing for the end of the INF Treaty. It was Trump who eventually pulled us out, but the beginning of the demise of the INF Treaty was with the Obama administration. There was, in order to get the INF Treaty and START, which came into reached their culminating moments in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we had 30 years of highly skilled, highly trained arms control negotiators at work. People who cut their teeth on the Abm Treaty, on the SALT negotiations, on early INF, on early START. These were the best of the best. Not all of them had the best interests of humanity, but they understood arms control. They understood the nuances, the complexities, et cetera. They understood the Russian or Soviet point of view. When the Cold War ended, we lost all this capability. They retired, they were reallocated, they went away. And we've never rebuilt a cadre of professional arms controllers, people who cut their teeth on arms control. What we have today, I call our supremacy enablers. See, an arms controller is about reciprocity, about sitting across the table from somebody that you treat as your equal. A supremacy enabler is somebody who sits at a table with an inferior, and your job is to negotiate something that sustains the supremacy on your side, while ensuring that those you negotiate are reduced in capability. We don't have arms control specialists anymore. We don't have an arms control class of professionals. We have supremacy enablers.
Yeah, it's all about dominance anymore. Let's go to the Abm Treaty. That was 1972 arms control treaty between the U.S. and the former Soviet Union on the limitation of anti-ballistic missile ABM systems that were used in defending against missile delivered nuclear weapons. So talk about the treaty briefly and why George W. Bush pulled the U.S. out of it.
Well, to understand the Abm Treaty, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, we have to understand the BM side of it, the ballistic missile side first, because that's what made the Abm Treaty so important. For instance, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the United States was worried about Russia had about 6 intercontinental ballistic missiles, liquid fueled, very bulky systems at a facility called Plesetsk in northern Russia. And, if there was a nuclear conflict, we would have had maybe a handful of nuclear armed, medium range missiles coming from Cuba, and no more than 6 missiles coming from Russia. Now that's a lot because a lot of people are going to die still, but what we did is we countered that with our own with newer systems, submarine launched ballistic missiles, and intercontinental ballistic missiles that were solid fuel systems. That means that there's no great preparation. They're simpler to use, faster, and they have the potential for even greater accuracy. And then we defended the silo-based systems by putting, or the intercontinental ballistic missiles, by putting them in the ground-based silos that were hardened so that they couldn't be struck. So now you're the Russians or the Soviets, and you're looking at this saying, "Whoa, America's now got a lot of these missiles, up to 1,000 Minuteman missiles. How do we respond to this? Because if we have our old systems, our old liquid systems that take forever to fuel, they can launch their Minutemen who can come and hit us before we can launch our missiles. So we have to upgrade our missiles." So they did. They built new generations of missiles but now they have to build them in sufficient quantity, not only to hit American cities, but now they got to take out the Minuteman silos. And those are hardened, and the accuracy of these missiles isn't that accurate. So you have to allocate maybe 3 or 4 missiles per silo. And if there's 1,000 silos, you need 4,000 missiles just to hit the silos, and then you need more missiles to come in and hit the cities. So now you're building a lot of missiles. And we say, well, that's no good. How do we respond to that? Do we build more missiles, or what if we put more warheads on the missiles? So now every missile we fire, instead of it going boom once, it goes boom 3 times. Or on the submarines, we can make it go boom 10 times. And the Russians went, oh dear. So they've got a lot of, what if we do the same thing and we put more warheads on but we build bigger missiles? The US can only put 3 warheads on the Minuteman, but if we build the SS-18, we can put 10, 15 warheads on it. And now we're overwhelmed them. And soon both sides went, this is insane, because we're literally, all we're doing is increasing the amount of times that we can make rubble shake, because we're already going to destroy the world. Now all we're doing is making rubble shake a little bit more afterwards. This is crazy, and it's dangerous, because it leads to both sides saying, we're building our nuclear arsenal in a way that allows us to win a nuclear war. And as soon as you put that thought into your head, it's over, because you can't win a nuclear war. So there came the recognition on both sides that nuclear war can't be won. So why don't we just acknowledge that if we go to war, we're going to destroy each other. Mutually assured destruction. Now, we bring in the anti-ballistic missile aspect of it, because part and parcel of this concept of blowing each other up was, can I defend myself from the other side? And so if I put in an anti-ballistic missile system designed to take out a Russian missile, I can fire 3 interceptors and probably get that missile. But now if that Russian missile disperses warheads, I have to allocate 3 interceptors per warhead, but then they throw in decoys, and now I have to so suddenly each missile, I need to allocate, 60 interceptors? How do I afford that? So I have to now build a whole bunch of missile defense sites, but now they complicate it by they have maneuvering warheads. And suddenly we're in an arms race on anti-ballistic missiles, and both sides realize this is crazy. It's expensive. We can't afford it. So why don't we ban it? Well, they couldn't ban it totally for political reasons. So the original treaty was written for 2 sites. I think one could be put at a national command authority, meaning protecting your capital, and the other one could be put to protect missile defenses. 2 sites. But both sides realized that this was just to assuage political leadership inside each country, that this was not real missile defense. This was fake missile defense that could guard against an accidental launch, but never guard against the full strike. And what this did, what the Abm Treaty did, is stop the madness of the arms race. And both sides were like punch-drunk fighters, just sitting there, breathing heavily after beating each other to death. And now they said, man, how do we get out of this boxing ring? How do we do this? How do we slow this race we've started? So then they started, the Abm Treaty led to the strategic arms limitation talks. It wasn't arms reduction, it was limitations, how to prevent the continued amassing of nuclear capability. And the ABM was the foundation upon which all arms control was built, because the ABM Treaty embraced the notion that nuclear war can't be won, and that if we go to nuclear war, both sides will be mutually destroyed. It's a guaranteed, mutually assured destruction. So that was the importance of the ABM Treaty. It was the centerpiece of all arms control that went on after that. Now, why would the Bush administration get rid of it? During the Reagan administration, Ronald Reagan bought into this notion of something called Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars. The idea that we could actually have the technology to shoot down Russian missiles. Now, the way the ABM Treaty was written is that certain research and development could be done, but once you crossed a certain threshold, you were in violation of the ABM Treaty. And Reagan believed that this treaty was tying America's hands, that America was in a situation where we could actually build a missile shield that would guarantee our security. He did not like the idea of mutually assured destruction. He did not like the idea of an American president accepting as normal the ability of the Soviet Union to destroy the United States. Even though we had the ability to destroy the Soviet Union, that was okay, but we couldn't let the Soviet Union have the ability to destroy us. And so, Star Wars started out. Fortunately for us, unfortunately for us, Star Wars existed. What I mean by unfortunately is, a little piece of history. In 1986, Ronald Reagan met with Mikhail Gorbachev in Reykjavik, Iceland. They had a very interesting conversation because Reagan had been attempted assassination a couple years prior, and in his recovery, he was exposed to a TV series called The Day After, ABC TV series about what the consequences of nuclear conflict. And he turned to his advisor and said, "Is that real? I mean, could that really be?" And they said, "Oh, actually, that was made for TV to look nice. It would be much worse." He said, "My God, we can never allow that to happen. We could never allow this to happen. No president could allow this to happen." And then the other thing was an exercise that NATO had in 1983 called Able Archer. And it was a command and control exercise on launching nuclear weapons. And the Soviets, in monitoring this, thought it was actually a real command that NATO was getting ready to launch a surprise nuclear attack. So they mobilized and put on high alert their nuclear forces, and we came very close to having a nuclear war based upon a misperception. And when the CIA briefed Reagan on this, he said, "No, they could never have thought we were going to do that. Why would they think we were going to do that?" They said, "Sir, they did. They thought we were going to launch." He said, "Well, this we can't let this happen." So he became a crusader against nuclear weapons. And he met with Mikhail Gorbachev, who at the same time was coming at the problem from the standpoint of Chernobyl, surviving the Chernobyl disaster, and realizing that this nuclear stuff is crazy, and also the expense. Gorbachev wanted to transform the Soviet economy away from this defense economy to a more consumer-oriented economy. And how do you do that when you're building all these missiles? So they sat down, and Reagan broached the idea. He said, why get rid of half of them? Why don't we get rid of all of them? Get rid of everything. And Gorbachev's like, "I like that idea. We can get rid of everything, but you got to get rid of SDI too. You can't do that." And Reagan went, "Nah, I can't do it." So that collapsed. Afterwards, the Soviet scientists told Gorbachev, "Man, you should have gone with it, because SDI will never work. It can never work. It's a pipe dream, etc." And they were right. But unfortunately, the people that were in the Reagan administration continued to be involved in government. And when George W. Bush came into office, many of these people were advising him, and they once again bought into the false promise of missile defense. And they believed now that the United States had the technology to build technically viable missile defense systems. But the thing that was constraining us was the ABM Treaty. And they also said that arms control is no longer important because Russia's weak, we're strong. So let's get rid of this treaty that's tying our hands. And Bush withdrew, and he was told by Putin, "This is a huge mistake. Don't do it. Don't do this." And every president afterwards was told by Putin, "You're making a huge mistake. in 2018, Putin announced a new generation of Russian strategic missiles, which are designed to defeat any missile defense system. But guess what? American missile defense systems don't work. So we pulled out of a treaty that was the foundation of all future arms control to build a missile defense system that doesn't work. But even if it did, the Russians did what we knew they were going to do because we learned that lesson back in from 68 to 72. For every missile defense concept you come up with, the other side will come up with a missile that can defeat it. We spent trillions of dollars to build a missile defense system that doesn't work, and the Russians spent tens of billions of dollars to develop weapons that can defeat them. This was about one of the most counterproductive moves made by an American president in modern times.
Let's move to the INF Treaty, which was an arms control treaty between the U.S. and the former Soviet Union. Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Gorbachev signed this treaty in 1987. The treaty was in part created due to large international protests against U.S. and Soviet nuclear missile deployments throughout Europe during the early 1980s. So talk about that treaty and what happened to it.
Well, again, everything has its historical foundation. And the important thing here is, there was, even though we had the Abm Treaty and we had the strategic arm limitation talks, there was a category of weapons, intermediate nuclear range weapons, short range nuclear weapons, that weren't covered by this treaty, by the limitation talks. And these had an impact on Europe. These were weapons that we called theater nuclear weapons. They weren't global in nature. They dealt primarily with a war in Europe. Russia had, old 1950s, 1960s technology that it wanted to upgrade. Russia had developed a mobile missile called the SS-20 that was virtually impossible to target, and it had 3 nuclear warheads, and basically all of Europe overnight fell at risk of being wiped out by the Russians immediately. And the Europeans objected to this. They said this is destabilizing. NATO said we have no counter to the SS-20. And so the United States, there was talks right now about reducing, controlling INF systems, but the Russians had all the cards. They were like, we're not giving up the SS-20, and we got this great weapon system. So the United States told Europe that we need to deploy our own modern INF systems, ground-launched cruise missile and the Pershing II missile. And it made sense from a military standpoint to come up with a counter, but politically it was a tough sell to Europe. There were tremendous demonstrations. The government of Helmut Kohl fell in Germany because of this. That's how serious this was. But the U.S. ended up deploying these systems. But here's the danger. If you remember, we talked about Able Archer and the threat of nuclear war. The Pershing II missile gave the United States the ability to strike Moscow in under 12 minutes, meaning once that missile's fired, 12 minutes later, Moscow goes boom. Now, that might work during wartime, but what if your goal isn't to go to war, that this is a weapon of deterrence, but there was an accident or there was a misperception? And the Russians now said, oh my God, they launched Pershings. They only have 12 minutes to make a decision. Do they wait to see if it was an accident? Or do they say, nope, launch on detection, we fire our missiles, boom, the world is it going to end? The world was very, very close to being in a position where one accident would mean the end of life on the planet. Europeans lived under the threat of imminent nuclear annihilation every day. So the INF Treaty was negotiated to get rid of these weapons, to ban them. No one thought it would happen. No one believed that that we would get to this, but we did. We did it. And one of the important aspects of it was on-site inspection as a verification tool. And just a little thing, I was the the first inspector on the ground in the Soviet Union when the INF Treaty started. So I enjoy my place in history. And it was a difficult job, but it was one that was accomplished, not just because of the professionalism of the Americans and indeed our European NATO allies who helped us, but of the Soviets and the Warsaw Pact allies who helped them. It was a mission that both sides believed in, and it was successful. We eliminated intermediate and short-range ballistic missiles, and in doing so, we built a model of verifiable arms control that enabled Russia or the Soviet Union, United States to consider going into strategic arms reduction. So the START I treaty was built on the foundation of success of the INF Treaty. So this is a foundational treaty that, together with the ABM Treaty, represented a model of arms control success that could be built upon. Unfortunately, Donald Trump withdrew from this treaty. The treaty was only between the Soviet Union and the United States. In the Pacific, we have China, who is building up their own ballistic missile capabilities. Much of that is centered on intermediate nuclear forces. And the United States felt that it was giving China too much advantage without any ability to respond, that the INF Treaty was no longer needed because Russia was weak. And so Donald Trump withdrew from the treaty, citing Russian non-compliance as the justification. But I think we are finding out now that the Russians were, if not in perfect compliance, were in full compliance. And the only side that was violating the INF Treaty was the United States.
Let me, we're getting short on time. Let me go to my last question here. Today, the U.S. has built 2 missile launch facilities called Aegis Ashore in Romania and Poland that can fire so-called missile defense systems, the shield, theoretically, after a Pentagon first strike attack, or they can also fire nuclear-capable Tomahawk cruise missiles. Isn't this a Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse for Russia?
Yes, and Russia has said so. Vladimir Putin has said so in all the speeches he's given recently, that these are very destabilizing systems. The Aegis Ashore was sold as a defensive-only system, but the Aegis system, Mark 41 system on a ship, it fires canisterized weapons. It means it can fire both the SM-3 anti-missile system and the Tomahawk sea-launched cruise missile. We said, oh, it's only configured to fire the SM-3. It could never fire the Tomahawk. Less than 1 month after we left the INF Treaty, we test fired the Tomahawk from Aegis Ashore canister. So instantly, the Aegis Ashore could be turned into a Tomahawk launcher. Not only that, we're modernizing the SM-3 into something called the SM-6, which is the Typhoon, which is the same missile in a canister, but now it fires a surface-to-surface capability. So these launch systems that we've built in Poland and Romania have the potential of being upgraded to provide immediate, intermediate-ranged, nuclear-capable ballistic missile capability for the United States and NATO, inherently destabilizing. And Russia has said that they will respond accordingly, which is they have deployed their own nuclear capability to deal with this threat. And Russia has said, if you introduce an intermediate range missile into Europe, as the United States has threatened to do so, we will respond by doing the same, which means we are on the verge of recreating the exact situation that existed in 1987 when we signed the treaty to get rid of these weapons to begin with. History is literally repeating itself.
So the U.S. has continually shown that it's not a reliable treaty partner. While Russia, I believe, and hearing you, it sounds like you also believe that Russia has been fairly consistent in terms of honoring their treaties and really wanting to de-escalate the tensions over the years.
No side's perfect. Every side makes mistakes, and the Russians have made their fair share of mistakes. But from a big picture item, the Russians take arms control seriously, and they take treaties seriously. The United States does not. And that's going to make it very difficult going forward, because can the Russians ever truly trust the United States in any future arms control agreement?
Well, thank you, Scott, so much. We really appreciate your interview. And thank you for watching another edition of Space Alert. We'll be back next month with another peace movement leader from another part of the world to discuss these issues as they relate to space. Until then, good luck, and please get organized.